All right, welcome back to One World. I'm Bianca Golodriga.
And I'm Zain Asher. This week marks a very grim anniversary, 1 year since fighting broke out between the Sudanese armed forces and its paramilitary rival, the Rapid Support Forces. The head of the UN says that crimes against humanity may be being committed in Sudan as the violence escalates. Okay. He also reports of hostilities in El Fasher, the capital of North Darfur, are causing deep alarm amid a desperate humanitarian situation in Sudan.
And let me be clear, any attack on El Fasher would be devastating for civilians and could lead to a full-blown intercommunal conflict across Darfur. It would also upend aid operations in an area already on the brink of famine, since El Fasher has always been a critical UN humanitarian hub.
At a recent aid conference in Paris, France says donors pledged more than $2 billion to help Sudan's civilian population.
All right, time now for the exchange. Our next guest says that aid for Sudan needs to be ramped up significantly. Clements is the UN Deputy High Commissioner for Refugees. She actually just got back from a visit to South Sudan and says the country that has received the largest number of refugees fleeing from the war. That's South Sudan. All right, Kelly, thank you so much for being with us. Our television screens over the past 6 months have been filled with images out of Gaza, obviously out of Israel after October 7th, and to a certain extent Ukraine as well. The world has largely forgotten, I think it's fair to say, about what is happening in Sudan right now. That country obviously on the brink of famine. So many people going hungry right now, just in terms of children simply not having enough to eat. If I was to walk through, just to remind our viewers what is happening in that country right now, if I was to walk through the streets of Khartoum or Darfur right now, what would I see? What would I experience?
Well, thanks for having us on the program, and thanks for bringing attention to Sudan, because indeed, as you've mentioned, this war has been largely under the shadows of other crises, Ukraine, the Middle East, and so on. And if you were to walk through Khartoum now, you would see devastation, you would see few civilians out, you would not see the humanitarian aid community in any numbers, because it's largely an inaccessible place for people to come in and provide the kind of support that we do with other partners. And you would see houses and apartments that are abandoned because people have quite literally run for their lives with very little with them. And the majority that are on the move are women and children. We see 8.6 million people that have been forcibly displaced from this war that started a year ago. 1.8 million have gone to the 7 neighboring countries, 7,000 kilometers of border. And then the vast majority have been internally displaced, but there are many, many more people in need. We estimate about 17.7 million people, both inside Sudan and those neighboring countries, are in need of immediate humanitarian aid and protection.
According to the UN, Kelly, only 6% of the money that has been allocated or said that needs to go to help this crisis has been allocated. As you mentioned, the high displacement numbers, over 8 million people. In fact, this is viewed as the highest displacement crisis right now in the world. 16,000 killed, 18 million food insecure. Why do you think it's not getting the attention globally that it deserves?
Well, the competing priorities, of course, but as you've mentioned, it's the scale, it's the complexity, and frankly, it's the brutality of this war on people, on individuals. Now, Paris and the announcements that were made on Monday were more than welcome, international solidarity and that $2 billion that was pledged in support, but that those resources need to move really quickly to be able to save lives. You know, we talk about people on the move. People are still leaving to places like Chad, 1,800 a day. And what I saw in South Sudan, in the north, in Rank, people are continuing to cross those borders as well. We have to tell the story of individual lives that are touched, that are affected, that are lost, and the trauma that people are experiencing, and why the international community needs to step forward and do more. I think it's quite literally difficult for the international attention to remain focused on a war that continues to rage on for a longer period of time. But this is something we need to continue to talk about in the case of Sudan because of regional stability and really because of global stability as well.
Yeah, I mean, you're right about the sort of competing international crises. I mean, the world has just so much on its plate right now in terms of which crises to pay attention to, but it's also because the crises that take place in Africa are largely forgotten by the international community. I do want to talk about the refugees. As you touched upon, there's a lot of people going to Chad, going to South Sudan. These are countries that just don't have the bandwidth to take in, not just take in refugees, but really offer refugees the life that they deserve. So walk us through what sort of assistance the international community is giving to countries like South Sudan and Chad, or what sort of assistance should they be given?
Well, and to recognize both countries and others that have kept their borders open to save lives. That is something that obviously widely recognized and widely praised. And in the case of Chad and South Sudan, they have welcomed their brothers and sisters, and they say more are welcome as well. But like you've said, these are two very poor countries. People are arriving in places with really literally nothing that they can help to rebuild their own lives, but also the host communities that are trying to give them the meager resources that they have. So it's everything from a safe place to sleep, clean water, food assistance, some of the psychosocial support to deal with the trauma. The incidence of rape and gender-based violence is widespread in this war. And so for us, with the international partners and the local partners in particular, which are so much in the lead on this response, we're trying to support the governments who are welcoming refugees. Now, in the case of Chad, there were already 400,000 refugees before the war broke out a year ago. Then add another 700,000 new arrivals, and you can tell in these very fragile environments with very few services available how difficult that is to cope. Same for South Sudan, 300,000 refugees before April of last year. Now they have 630,000 people that have arrived, some South Sudanese returnees that haven't lived in South Sudan for many, many years, also needing to be received, to receive support, to receive transport to their places where they came from, but literally they don't have the tools they need, the mechanisms they need to be able to rebuild their lives. And some of those include things like education, which are as important in emergencies like this as food and water.
Kelly, thank you so much for the work that you're doing on the ground. I mean, obviously, you just got back from South Sudan, and you are shining a spotlight on the plight of refugees from the people who have left Sudan to go to South Sudan. So thank you so much for your work. We appreciate it. Kelly Clements, the UN Deputy High Commissioner for Refugees. We'll be right back.